What do you mean I can't pay my phone bill in Beach Boys stuff? You only accept cash? Service will be disconnected. No good vibrations. Hello? Guess I've been buying too much Beach Boys stuff. You might remember in our last episode of the Beach Boys Greatest Hits retrospective about a month ago, I covered Greatest Hits Volume 1, 20 Good Vibrations, a release that's very nostalgic to me as it was the first Beach Boys album that I ever purchased, kicked off my lifelong love for the group. The original cassette was released and CD, I guess, original cassette and CD released in 1995. This is an original 95 cassette. The CD I just showed you is the 1999 reissue. But speaking of 1999, you know with the Beach Boys, where there's one, there's bound to be another. Speaking of 1999, the same day as that reissue of Volume 1 was released to stores, so was a new release, Volume 2, 20 More Good Vibrations. This is a very interesting set because it features a lot of things that probably just barely missed the cut for the first release, and also some very interesting ones. Songs that were very successful overseas, or songs that were more associated with the live set and whatnot. A very cool release, and a perfect one to cover today. So let's dig a little deeper into 1999's 20 More Good Vibrations. So first off, we'll actually look at this cassette tape while I have it here. This is still sealed, even has a price sticker on it. And I bought it mostly because it has the hype sticker still there. You can see advertising a few songs that people will recognize. And notably there you see Don't Worry Baby from the new movie Never Been Kissed. I actually have Never Been Kissed on VHS, but it's broken. I guess I have to try to dig up a new one at the thrift store or something, but I thought this was very cool. We're going to spend most of our time looking at the CD. So by 1999, CDs were supplanting cassettes pretty regularly. I would argue that when the first volume came out in 95, cassette was probably still the dominant form. CD was maybe slowly taking some of that market share, but not to the point where it would completely supplant it. It should also be noted that Volume 1 and 2 here are the first major Beach Boys hits packages to not be released to vinyl. They were strictly, CD and cassette kind of releases. So we're moving away from vinyl. As a child of the 90s, I can attest to the fact that growing up in that decade, vinyl was seen as old news. It would take a while for it to kind of come back into vogue, at least in my experience. This was released September the 21st, 1999, again the same day as that reissue. We'll take a quick look at the track list there for you, so I'll read that off. We have, going in chronological order, second only to Volume 1 in terms of Beach Boys releases that use chronological order. We have In My Room, The Warmth of the Sun, Don't Worry Baby, All Summer Long, Wendy, Little Honda, When I Grow Up to Be a Man, Please Let Me Wonder, You're So Good to Me, The Little Girl I Once Knew, Caroline No, Heroes and Villains, Wild Honey, Darlin', Friends, Do It Again, Bluebirds Over the Mountain, I Can Hear Music, Breakaway, and Cottonfields. So again, 20 songs in chronological order. So we get a very generous amount of music, all arranged as Beach Boys fans would have experienced them from 1963 to 1970. You might remember that Volume 1 covered 1962 through 1966, and then Kokomo was tacked on at the end. This way you had all of the Beach Boys' top 3 hits and most of their kind of major, immediately recognizable charting singles. So the first half of this second volume, I think, is the stuff that just barely missed it. We have some very successful B-side singles here, like In My Room and Don't Worry Baby. We have a very successful A-side single, When I Grew Up to Be a Man. That was a top 10 single. We have a top 20, Little Girl I Once Knew. And then we have a lot of like fan favorites, stuff that's in the live set a lot, like Wendy and All Summer Long and Little Honda. Those kinds of songs there too. So the first half of this, from 1 to 10, the stuff that just barely missed getting on the Volume 1 release. It's the second half where things get a little more interesting. Before we go too much further, let me show you the insert here. Like Volume 1, we kind of have an accordion style pamphlet. A very long one, as you see. Show you some of those inside images. Very nice picture collages there. Then we have detailed info about the production credits. And some nice artwork. And if you flip that around, we get song-by-song liner notes that talk about the chart positions, they talk about the albums that were released on. Everything on here uses the single versions. This is most notable in songs like Caroline No and Do It Again, where the album versions had like sound effect codas. Those are not present here. Then we get kind of charting information, album information for each song. Sorry about the glare on this, but on that black background, it's kind of hard to avoid. So pretty cool. It's a really nice set. Hold that up for you. Very nice, comprehensive bit. There's a lot of stuff about pet sounds in the booklet, which kind of surprises me because there's only one Pet Sounds song on here. That's Caroline No. And you could even argue that Caroline No is a Brian Wilson solo track because the single was released in that form. Granted, yes, it's on Pet Sounds. Yes, the Beach Boys have been alive periodically, but it's a little more of a stretch than some songs. It's probably why we don't see Caroline No on hits packages a whole lot. Alrighty, so we mentioned, of course, these are single versions. Some songs like Bluebirds Over the Mountain from 2020 have a lot of different mixes that have been released. The album version is pretty similar, but they're like alternate takes. Like if you look on Beach Boys Rarities here, the Bluebirds Over the Mountain featured here. Completely different mix, a lot different than what you'd expect. Everything on here has already been released to a greatest hits package, at least in some capacity. There are a couple differences like Cottonfields that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but for the most part, you know, this was just an interesting compilation. Like I said, that first half or so, all stuff that just missed Volume 1. So we pick up in 1967, we have Heroes and Villains, very successful charting single. We have the two lead songs from Wild Honey. We have Darlin' and the title track Wild Honey, both of which are featured here. Friends was peaked around number 47, I want to say. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. But it's nice to see it here. Kind of an interesting inclusion there. Do It Again, of course, a big hit. Then our last few, Bluebirds Over the Mountain, like I just said, I mentioned with the different mixes and stuff, was a big hit overseas, but was not a big hit in the US. And today it's probably best remembered for having the Charles Manson song, Never Learn Not to Love, as its B-side. But it's really nice to see it here. We'd only seen it on Sunshine Dream. The Beach Boys hadn't done it live in the US for quite some time, probably since the late 60s. So it's nice to kind of see it here. It's a really cool cover, pretty good stuff. I Can Hear Music has a big fan base, but let's talk about the penultimate track, Breakaway. Breakaway has a very convoluted release history in the US. It was a big hit in the UK, peaking at number 6, and a big hit in much of Europe, but only peaked around number 63 in the United States. And later releases of Breakaway didn't actually use the charting album single. There are, or I should say the charting single mix, excuse me, because Breakaway was never on an album. So releases like Endless Harmony Soundtrack and Hawthorne, California use like demo versions or early versions or alternate takes. And I say this because some of these releases popped up on later greatest hits packages and later box sets, using not the widespread commercial release but an alternate take, which is very unusual. Breakaway maybe holds some kind of bitterness for the Beach Boys because it was one of the songs that Capitol retained ownership for in the late 60s when the rest of the Beach Boys catalog reverted to their control. Because Breakaway was not on an album, Capitol could withhold that, and indeed I think the only reason it's on the Spirit of America album is because they wanted to give the Beach Boys the middle finger and say, you know, hey, you think you own all your songs? No, you don't. So Breakaway, kind of odd. When Feel Flows came out a couple years ago, And that this, of course, is to celebrate 1969, 1970, 1971. Breakaway only got the single version and a very small backing vocal excerpt released. So very strange, a song that was, not a big success, but maybe could have been groomed into being very successful. Kind of just fell by the wayside. So it's nice to see it here on a more conventional greatest hits package in its original single form, as opposed to getting some alternate take or something like that. Again, I think it's a song that's kind of buried in legal entanglements and whatnot. It's a lot, because it was such a big hit in the UK, it's actually on a lot of British and Australian and other European and worldwide hits packages like 20 Golden Greats. Pretty cool stuff. The other one that is worth talking about a little more is the final track, Cottonfields. Cottonfields was a big hit worldwide, going all the way to #1 and making the top 10 in many other countries. I should say 1 or the top 10. In the US, it peaked right around the 100 mark. It just never caught on. This is the single mix, not the album version from 2020. It has, this is the Brian Wilson produced version. This is the Al Jardine produced version. So it's nice to see it on a hits package, because the previous release that used the song Sunshine Dream used this one. And I think it's kind of fallen by the wayside in favor of Jardine's single mix. That single mix is on the Rarities collection, just like Bluebirds Over the Mountain. Someday I'll do a video on Beach Boys Rarities with its unquestionably provocative cover. But it's interesting to see a song that really wasn't a hit in the US included on a hits package, just for presumably fairly casual fans. I think that's a really nice inclusion. I love Cottonfields. I think it really jams, and I think they made the right choice by using the single version, even though it maybe wasn't as popular, instead of going with the album cut. So, to talk about the cover art very quickly, you might remember Volume 1 uses the exploding orange from the Good Vibrations box set. Volume 2 favors the winged blue heart there, and you can see the winged blue heart on another one of the Good Vibrations box set releases. So someone obviously really liked this icon, figured they could kind of reuse it for what they wanted. So all in all, a very interesting release. Now it only peaked around number 192, and much of its sales were attributed to the release of the TV movie American Family, which was a biopic about the Beach Boys and whatnot, and of course coinciding with the re-release of the very popular Volume 1, which had fared much better. I think this one is just a little too eclectic, with a few too many songs that people maybe didn't know as well, like Bluebirds Over the Mountain, like Breakaway, like Cottonfields, that people definitely recognize the first half of this, but some of those tracks on the second half, even like Friends for example, really might not have been what people were looking for in their Beach Boys collection. So unfortunately, it was kind of a lukewarm reception, and this hasn't really caught on, I think, the same way that Volume 1 has. I don't see this one secondhand nearly as much. So this was my first Beach Boys release. This one was my second. I found it at Barnes & Noble actually. I was like, well, I like Volume 1. Oops, there goes the cassette. I like Volume 1 so much that I have to get Volume 2. And really glad I did though. It's a fun set. Next time we'll talk about the even more forgotten Volume 3. So stick around for that one. And we'll talk more about overseas Beach Boys releases there too. In the meantime, if you have any favorites from the late 1960s, please comment them below. I'd love to hear from you. Till then, my friends, go out there and catch a wave. It's almost summer.